What happens in the afterlife is one of humans' greatest mysteries, and people are trying to constantly find out the answers to what lies beyond our physical realm.
Some of the best people to ask just maybe those who have, I don't know, experienced death themselves only to be brought back to life minutes later. It's kind of insane. Some of these are actually really scary. This user claims to have seen the other side after being admitted to an ICU. They saw this field with trees on both sides and then water right at the end of it. Like those fields with the electrical lines that run through with no houses, no residents. It's calm, but it's a long clear area surrounded by trees. But in the center there was a very large oak tree and it had this massive presence, and it told them, the tree told them, that they were not done living yet and should return back to life. But they reminded this figure that they were very sick in real life and that this seemed like a nice place. The forest, they note, felt dark and scary though, those trees on both sides. It felt like a place they didn't want to go, only towards the water. And then they saw a bright light and woke up in the ICU. Again, they don't want a religious debate or anything, that's just their experience. Forest bad, water good. Duly noted.
In our number 9 spot today we have Fields of Gold. This story comes from a Reddit thread in which the original poster asked the question of what those who had died and been resuscitated remembered seeing. A Reddit user replied to the thread and explained a story that their mom had told them about when her heart stopped during surgery. Their mom thankfully was brought back, and when she recovered enough and woke up from surgery, she later explained that all she remembered was being in a field of flowers. So here I am, hearing that, thinking of the Wizard of Oz, everyone's just skipping down the yellow brick road, but as it turns out, maybe it's absolutely nothing like that. There was one Redditor who commented on this story with a hot take that kind of made me feel a little uneasy about the whole thing. They explained how it makes sense that a field of flowers is traditionally a more calming image, but that it feels odd to them. A little unnerving and empty, totally devoid of any other people. I'm not gonna lie, that does sound quite eerie, but I'm sure for some of you watching this video that truly sounds like heaven.
Number 8, a life lesson. This next one comes from a user named Harry and Lana. One semester they had a class where this man came in to explain his near-death experience. What a powerful class. Our only guess would be like, people who wrote one poem 10 years ago. You're like, great, I'm gonna fall asleep in this class. This man was kayaking with a friend. He ended up flipping his kayak over, and then he got sucked under by the current. His friend had to watch him pass out underwater and get dragged down the river. Just a nightmare of a scene, but during his time unconscious, the man described this dark place almost as if it was a cave, but the walls were soft and velvet-like. At the end of this cave, there was a plethora of colors. He described it as a kaleidoscope, one would say, or a stained glass window. Either way, it was beautiful. But he saw these dark figures passing by on the other side of this glass. Moments after one of the most frightening experiences of his life, he said he felt comfort and peace. He felt like God wanted him to be there, but he also said that you must have to be pretty terrible to go to hell because he himself wasn't the greatest of guys before this accident. His friend caught up to his body, luckily, and he was able to revive him, but now this man feels a stronger connection with everybody and he's grateful to have had this experience. This user finishes the story saying that they hope this was calming to hear, as other encounters are quite scary. Yeah, it was calming, thank you, and also we're glad that you're alive. Sweet.
In our number 7 spot today we have The Gates of Hell. Veronica Ulrich Barthel was 22 years old in 1981, and that is when she was struck by lightning while she was driving. I always thought that that was impossible, but turns out everyone just lied to me as a kid. But I'll unpack that later, I guess. When she got struck by lightning, she began having an out-of-body experience. She said she could see herself holding the steering wheel with burned hands, which sounds absolutely terrifying. She then said she went on a journey through a tunnel which led her to be standing in front of a gate that read, "Welcome to Hell." Yeah, okay, I thought the burned hands were bad, but this might be worse. She then explains that she was brought to a waiting room, which sounds a lot like hell, and that she could see people suffering in torment, and I was like, yeah, we've all been in a waiting room before, we get it. She then said that she met someone who she presumed to be Jesus, but who really knows? Whoever this mystery man was, he sent her back to her body. When she came back into the physical world, apparently all she could do was scream, "I was dead and in hell," over and over and over again.
Number 6, Annabelle Beam. At just age 4, Annabelle Beam was diagnosed with 2 life-threatening digestive disorders, and by the time she was 8 years old, she was struggling quite a bit. She was sitting in a tree just thinking about life. She was up high, maybe 30 feet up, but all of a sudden the branch that she was sitting on broke and she fell down into a hollow part of the base of the tree. She was stuck there for 6 hours, but during that time, she said that she died and went to heaven. They actually made a movie about this. It came out in 2016 with Jennifer Gardner. It's called Miracles from Heaven. Fun fact, when I worked at a movie theater that year, where I actually had to assemble the tree of life in the front lobby. It was a rough morning, a lot of leaves, but you know what? Great film. Go check it out. But the story is wild. It's a real story, and after she fell, she was all of a sudden with Jesus, with J-Lord himself. And Jesus told her that after the firefighters got her out, she won't be sick anymore, and that she has plans to fulfill here on Earth. When she did wake up later, she was indeed no longer sick, and her mother wrote the book Miracles from Heaven.
In our number 5 spot today, we have poor Michelangelo. This is another Reddit story that pertains to an experience someone's mom had. The Redditor explained that their mom had a brain aneurysm that was nearly fatal. There was a point where the doctors were telling the Redditor that their mom likely wasn't going to make it, but thankfully by some miracle their mother was able to make a full recovery. She later told the Redditor that after experiencing several hours of pain, she eventually just felt total peace, lightness, and relaxed happiness. This is super nice, which is why I had to include it, but it's actually not what I want to talk about today. The super crazy part about this is that the first words that the Redditor's mother spoke to them when she awoke were, quote, "Isn't it so sad about Michelangelo?" Yes, I was also confused at first, but later in the thread, the Redditor cleared up what she meant. Keep in mind that prior to this terrible incident, their mother never had any interest in art, or Michelangelo for that matter. It turns out, however, that once she awoke, whatever happened or wherever she went, she was given the impression that Michelangelo was essentially treated really terribly and was put under some pretty awful conditions for the 4 years that it took him to paint the Sistine Chapel. The Redditor said that it was so out of character at the time that it was quite concerning, which totally makes sense, but now I'm just wondering if this information is actually true.
Number 4, stay or go. Coming from user Zana Vinovovich, this account takes us back to 1986. Her mother was put under for C-section, and at that time they were in Italy and not citizens, so she also chose to not have a sonogram to determine the sex. So she was put under, and then next you know, doctors are performing CPR chest compressions on her. What is happening? Her mother said that while she was out of it, despite what was happening in real time, she felt also at peace. She was calm and in a very comforting place. She didn't hear a voice or see a tree figure or Jesus, but she felt like she could go either way. She could stay or go. She recalls speaking to this presence that she felt, and she explained how she couldn't go because she had 3 girls to take care of, but at this point she didn't have the 3rd child yet. Interesting. Now cut to 23 years later, she's fine, everybody's fine, but that experience has made an impact on her, of course. So when she told her father about what had happened when she was under, he even said that he himself had a similar experience when he suffered a heart attack.
In our number 3 spot today, we have 45 years. In 1943, Dr. George Ritchie died of pneumonia, but after 9 long minutes, he came back and was sure to tell the tale of what happened while he was gone. He went on to write a book called Return from Tomorrow and My Life After Dying. He recounts a lot of stuff in this book, from an out-of-body experience to meeting people, but the last thing he remembered was meeting someone who he calls God, although it might have been Jesus, or neither. Either way, whoever he met left him with a mental message that told him, quote, "It is left to humanity which direction they shall choose. I came to this planet to show you through the life I led how to love. Without our Father you can do nothing, neither could I. I showed you this. You have 45 years. When he came back to his body, he explained that his throat was on fire and that he felt weight on his chest that was crushing to him. I'm not exactly sure what this message was supposed to mean. I mean, mostly the whole 45 years thing. Dr. Ritchie passed away in 2007, which was almost 64 years after his near-death experience, but whatever this message was intended to mean, that was probably the coolest and most terrifying experience in the whole world.
Number 2, a long nap. These encounters have a similar comforting theme almost, that in the end, one way or another, there's a good chance whatever you believe in, whatever lies beyond is peaceful. This next one gave me comfort, and it comes from a user named Apple Pasta, also great name. They recall being in a coma after a car accident, and they were legally dead for around 2 minutes. Everybody kept asking them what it was like afterwards, which also don't do that, it's pretty rude. Wait till they're ready to talk about it. And their response was always the same. It was the exact same as sleeping. They don't have much memory of it, but the coma, as a whole, they remember this time where everything felt slow and everything was foggy around them. They also felt like their memory of the event is slowly starting to change over time. Maybe they're convincing themselves what they thought happened, but one thing that they're sure of is the feeling that they had, and that the experience has made them unafraid of death, and at the end of the day, dying is just like a long nap. And man, do I love a long nap. I love that last line, man, do I love a long nap, because we do too. Thank you for sharing, Apple Pasta. Sorry about your accident, and we're glad you're okay.
In our number 1 spot today, we have Serenity. This story comes from Reddit, and I thought it might be be a good note to end off on because although it is a little eerie, there's something comforting about it as well. The Redditor explained that their grandma was a nurse for her whole life and that during her time she had only ever seen 2 people be resuscitated. One of them was a teenage boy and the other was years and years later, and it was a middle-aged, tough as nails, biker type guy. Neither of them were particularly religious or had any kind of spiritual affiliation, but what was striking to her was that both of them had the same reaction to being brought back, and that was how they both said something along the lines of, "Why'd they do that? I was so peaceful." See what I mean? A little eerie, but also oddly comforting. Aside from that woman who went to the gates of hell, a lot of people I've talked about today have had fairly calming experiences wherever they went during their near-death experience, and I think that that's something that can make us all feel a little bit better about what sits beyond us in the unknown.
Number 10. Lights and stars. When you bump your head or maybe you stand up too quickly, you always see stars floating around your head. It's almost like a cartoon. This happens when the tissues in your occipital lobe get moved around, so in turn your brain will send electrical impulses and our big dumb heads will see that as beautiful stars. A user by the name of Old Belgian Smurf might just have you beat. They almost died a year ago from drowning and the experience changed them forever, obviously. They'd been dead for an uncertain amount of minutes, but luckily first responders were able to pull them out of the water and revive them. They say it took 2 minutes to bring them back to life, but during that time, Old Belgian Smurf was seeing the unimaginable. Basically all I saw was blackness followed by many lights, lights that became stars, and then stars that turned into something I cannot even describe. I didn't feel anything. First of all, we're glad you're okay. That experience must have been horrific, but secondly, it brings me comfort that they didn't feel anything. A lot of these stories that we're finding usually have that as a common denominator here. There's no pain. And as for the stars that turn into something completely different, that excites me almost. I feel like we're all just in this big cosmic brain floating around in space, so maybe the afterlife was just that. Just quiet cosmos for all of eternity. I'm so on board with this. I'd rather a black hole than a field of daisies. At least then I won't sneeze for eternity. Sounds annoying.
In our number 9 spot today we have Worry Free. This story comes from someone who is explaining a time when they witnessed their frat brother's near-death experience. They explained that this story changed that person's life and probably theirs as well. I don't think seeing someone die and then come back to life is on the list of regular occurrences for people, so that makes a lot of sense. So, this frat brother was clinically dead for 45 seconds. I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but being dead for 45 seconds when you're trying to be alive is absolutely terrifying, I'm sure. The frat brother explained that during this time he had an out-of-body experience where he could see himself as he was over top of the whole situation. He could see the hospital bed and all of the nurses working to bring him back, and from here he says that he slowly floated through the roof and had this feeling of extreme peace, like nothing he had ever felt before. He said he was free of all worry and all regret. During this feeling of complete peace he saw a white light, and then shortly after he saw family members of his that had already passed away. They explained to him that it just wasn't his time yet, and they helped him float back to his body. Yeah, absolutely terrifying, but probably the coolest thing ever, too.
Number 8. Stairway to heaven. The last thing I want to do after I die is climb a stairway to heaven. That sounds like a lot of stairs. I don't want to run up Bowser's never-ending staircase after I die. I have horrible knees. No thank you. Back in the 90s, a man named Tony Sikoria was hit by lightning, and like others on our part 1, he luckily survived to talk about his experience. He was an orthopedic surgeon, and after he got hit, he saw, well, a stairway to heaven, just like the Zeppelin song. He explained to the New Yorker what it felt like. He said he could feel his body being propelled up the stairs, so no actual climbing. Nice. You're just being yanked by your chest into the skies. No sweat, awesome. But again, the feelings he had were those of peace and love. He said he was overwhelmed by the feeling and that he somehow bought a stairway to heaven, but it was gone too soon. So maybe in your time of dying, you're just dazed and confused. Nothing but a fool in the rain, and then once you pass over the hills and then far away, good times or bad, it doesn't matter. It's just a whole lot of love. Maybe that's the afterlife.
In our number 7 spot today we have Doritos and grilled cheese. This story comes from someone who starts off by cutting right to the chase and saying that during their near-death experience they died for 3 minutes. Since this experience, they've always found it weird how people explain that they go to some sort of near afterlife, because that is nothing like what they saw in the 3 minutes they were gone. They said that for them it was pretty much just like sleeping. When they came back they were told how they almost died, and this came as a huge surprise to them, and then everything just went back to normal. They were offered a grilled cheese and they also had Doritos. They end their story by saying, quote, 10 out of 10 would die again. It's just nothingness. Not scary at all. That is oddly comforting, although a little eerie, but I have one question. What kind of Doritos? If it's Cool Ranch, that's how you know you're in hell. Might think twice about those sins next time.
Number 6, a black bubble. This one comes from user Maggie Does Meow Often. Again, these online names are great. All these serious stories and their names are just so fun. I love it. They shared their story online and it happened when they were 13 years old. They were riding their bike and right before they got hit by a car, they had a feeling. It's almost like they knew it was going to happen, which is terrifying. Now, of course, right before, they had no time to react other than brace themselves. But all they remember after being hit was being in this state of pure silence. They couldn't hear, they couldn't smell, or they couldn't feel anything. There were no thoughts, their life didn't play before them like a James Cameron movie. It was just this black bubble of nothingness. And again, they've never felt more peaceful in their entire life. It felt like they were there for hours, but in reality it was just less than a minute. They woke up, of course, to chaos. Cars were surrounding them, pretty much the exact opposite of what they just saw. But we're glad you're okay. Thanks for sharing. Maggie Does Meow Often. Also, never change your name, ever. Thanks.
In our number 5 spot today, we have the shadow people. This story comes from someone who was in the hospital with a brain bleed and things were really not looking good. It was at the point where their family was saying goodbye and this person was being put under to see if the doctors could get things under control in a sort of Hail Mary situation. Just all around an absolutely terrifying thing to have happen. So the family is saying goodbye and that's when this person sees 3 shadow people at the foot of their bed. I gotta say, out of all of the stories we've heard in part 1 and part 2, this has gotta be the least comforting. Most people are talking about going through a field of flowers and this person gets shadow people? Wow, a little unfair. So anyway, this person asks who these shadow people are, and their mother tells them that they're angels because really what else do you say? The person who was seeing them thought that they may have been their passed on relatives who were getting ready to bring them to the other side. Either way, it must have been so scary. In the end, this person ended up being okay because the doctor's work was successful and they lived on to tell us this super creepy story.
Number 4, family visit. This next one comes from a user named Hopeful Husband. Okay, not a silly name, more of a adult one, we're doing it. And it gave me goosebumps the first time I read it, I'm not gonna lie. And so in part 1 of this list, we had mentioned a field of flowers more than once, oddly, and for this next one, well, we're gonna do it again. They were pronounced dead twice when they were 16, both in the same night. They were in a car accident, and then right after impact, their great-grandmother pulled them out. She pulled them out of the car and they went for a walk through a peaceful, you guessed it, field of flowers. When they woke up later again in the hospital, great-grandma was still there, but this time she was at the side of their bed. She had told them to pass a message on to their mother saying that everything was going to be okay. Their great-grandmother had actually passed 6 years prior, and even before so, she was bedridden after a stroke, so this user never saw her walk or even heard her voice before this day. They said it was amazing and beautiful. All these stories are heartwarming because even after getting in a horrible car accident, they still end it by saying it was amazing and beautiful. This is making me feel better about the afterlife. I gotta admit, thank you, hopeful husband. You've now made me a hopeful single guy. I don't have a cool name yet, sorry.
In our number 3 spot today, we have kitchen nightmares. This story comes from someone who had a near-death experience as a teenager. They were climbing on top of the kitchen counters to grab something from the highest shelf, and I'm here to tell you, just get a stepping stool for the kitchen. I feel your pain, but you just gotta do it. It's worth it every single time. Anyway, so I'm sure you know where this is going, but they slipped off of the counter and went headfirst into the marble floor. Next thing they knew, no kitchen, no marble floor. Instead, they were now walking barefoot in water. That sounds nice and peaceful. From there, they looked to the upper right side and there was a bright light. We've talked about a bright light a few times and it really is one of those old movie tropes, but perhaps it's based in some sort of reality? I'm not sure. Inside of this specific bright light, however, there's a hand poking out that is making a come here gesture. They begin walking towards it and it's at this moment that they realize just how peaceful and relaxed they are. They said that it felt like it was the best deep sleep ever. They remember saying to themselves, man, this is awesome. I never want to wake up. And right in that moment, they're jolted awake. They were brought back to where they were when they left to go to that peaceful place and were later told that apparently they were stiff and cold with no heartbeat. Thank goodness they came back and hopefully they got a stool after that. It is so creepy to hear these stories, but sometimes ones like these are just so comforting to hear.
Number 2, there and back again. Coming from user Mr. Teabag, favorite name thus far, they were electrocuted twice and the first one killed them, the second one brought them back to life. It was over 13,000 volts and right after they got hit, they recall entering this darkness. They said it was the darkest dark and the most silent silence. As they felt themselves dying, they didn't care. Yeah, you heard me, they felt nothing. Even time itself was distorted. It felt like hours, but in reality it was only about 30 seconds. It felt like their body was floating towards something specific. They felt themselves ascending back to their own body in reality. So they died and they were floating around for a bit and they floated back to their own soul, which is so creepy. As soon as they got close, they felt the worst pain ever as they were coming back to life to face the electrical burns that killed them only a mere 30 seconds ago. Well, we're happy you came back. Thanks for sharing, Mr. Teabag. Also, that's pretty frightening that you saw your own body. I've seen myself when I'm dreaming sometimes in like third person, and now I'm gonna start looking into that. That's a bit eye-opening. Thanks.
In our number 1 spot today, we have the waiting room. This story comes from someone who was in the hospital for a chronic illness, and then they ended up passing out because their fever was so high. They were rushed to emergency surgery, and this is when their heart stopped on the operating table. They were out for 6 minutes before being revived, and this is what they experienced during that time. They say it was like floating in water, kind of. Like they had no body, but their soul or spirit or whatever you want to call it, it was floating in this sort of infinite blackness outside of time, and they felt like they were there forever, even though it was only 6 minutes. They explained that it was just completely peaceful. No cares, no worries, no fear, no pain, just calmness and content. During this, however, they can't explain how, but they knew it wasn't the end place. It was more like a waiting room, and they knew that if their name was called, they'd go somewhere else, so they were just waiting there, floating, content, until someone called their name, but it never came. Eventually they fell hard and fast. They said it was absolutely terrifying, and that is when they woke up with a bright light shining in their face and beeping in their ears and a tube in their throat. Right back full of worries, fear, and probably pain as well. They end their story by explaining that they've had quite a few surgeries in their life and have never had a similar experience, so they know it wasn't the anesthetic they were given. The only difference between this surgery and the others is that 6 minutes that they were gone for.